Frederick Douglass, born about 1817, died 1895. He wrote, "I suppose myself to have been born in 1817. Masters allowed no questions concerning their ages to be put to them by their slaves. They regarded all such questions as evidence of an impudent curiosity."
Your doing with the Negro has been their greatest misfortune. The Negro should have been let alone in Africa, let alone by the pirates and robbers who offered him for sale in our Christian slave markets, let alone by the courts and the politicians and the legislators and the slave drivers. Let him alone.
Booker T. Washington, born about 1858 in slavery, died 1915. He was the first Negro to have dinner in the White House, that is, without serving it.
In 1901, I dined at the White House with President Theodore Roosevelt. And sometime after, I met a poor white Southerner. "Say," said the white man, "you know, you are the greatest man in the country." I began to protest and said that in my opinion, the president was the greatest man in the country. "Huh," said the Roosevelt. I used to believe that Roosevelt was a great man until he ate dinner with you.
1963. He's a descendant of Negroes, Dutchmen, and French, and thank God.
It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt or pity.
Marcus, born 1887, died 1940. In 1923, at the height of his career, his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, had 4 million members.
It is the duty of the virtuous and morally pure of the white and black races to vigorously oppose the vile efforts of the miscegenationists of the white race and their associates, the hybrids of this. I believe in a pure race.
Thank God I am free and left, free and left, free and left. Thank God I am free and left. One day walking alone, thank God I am free and left. On meadow seat on my way, thank God I am free and left. What you read?
Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, William E.B. DuBois, Marcus Garvey. 4 men whose life and work seem to have been excluded almost totally from the history of our country. Sometimes they stir us faintly as a half-remembered dream, snatches of a song of the dead, almost as if they'd never lived or loved or rejected or died for the American dream. Yet, in the years from the time the Negro was set free up to and including World War II, these 4 men, and others even more obscure, wrote not only the history of the Negro people, but in a large sense, the history of our country.
No more take a corn for me, no more, no more, no more take a corn for me, many thousand more.
Freedom. 1865, the year the war ended. Earlier that year, General Robert E. Lee had said, "It is not only expedient but necessary that the Confederate Army should use Negro slaves as soldiers." Of course, Mr. Lincoln and the Union Army had already beat him to it. 2 years earlier, the President had signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing all the slaves in the Confederacy. Frederick Douglass, a former slave, and now a leading abolitionist, was in Boston at the time.
You can't imagine how it was We were all waiting and listening as if for a bolt from the sky. A bolt that would rend the shadows of 4 millions of slaves. 8, 9, 10 o'clock came and went, and still no word. At last, when the suspense was becoming an agony, a man exclaimed, "It's coming, it's coming, it's on the wires." Oh, the effect of that announcement was startling beyond description. And it was wild, and it was grand.
Way down in Dixieland, tell old Jeff Davis, let my people go. 7-year-old Booker T. Washington was a slave in Virginia. How was it with you when you heard the news?
Oh, well, for us, it was different. We were still slaves. My mother leaned over and kissed her children with tears running down her cheeks. And for some minutes, there was great rejoicing and thanksgiving and some wild scenes of ecstasy. But by the time we returned to the cabins, our feeling had changed. The great responsibility of being free, of having charge of ourselves and our children, seemed to take possession of us. There was the question of home, a living, the rearing of children, education, citizenship. Some of the slaves were 70 or 80 years old. Their best days were gone. They had no strength in which to earn a living in a strange place and among strange people.
But Negroes had their freedom and the vote. Suddenly, overnight, there was Blanche Kelso Bruce, senator from Mississippi, Robert H. Wood, mayor of Natchez, and many others. Negroes passed laws abolishing imprisonment for debt, authorizing universal male suffrage and free public education. Negroes and whites were eating together, going to school together, riding together on the same streetcar. A Northern reporter, James S. Pike, went into the South Carolina House of Representatives.
Secretary is black. Clerk is black. The doorkeepers are black. The chairman of Ways and Means is black.
Robert Smalls was a Negro representative from South Carolina. He was worshipped by his constituents.
You know, that Smalls is a genius.
Smalls ain't so hot. He ain't God.
Yeah, that's true. But give him time. He's a young man yet.
Du Bois called it the mystic years. There was the promise that the dream would be fulfilled. But it is also recorded there were other promises.
The child is already born who will behold the last Negro in the state of Mississippi.
General Carl Schurz went south to make a special investigation for the administration.
Senators, a reign of terror prevails in many parts of the South. Some planters hold back their former slaves by brute force. Armed bands of white men patrol the country roads to force back the Negroes wandering about. The bodies of murdered Negroes have been found on and near the highways. Gruesome reports of colored men and women whose ears had been cut off, whose skulls had been broken by blows, whose bodies had been slashed by knives or lacerated with scourges.
Does any sane man believe that the Negro is capable of comprehending the 10 Commandments, the miraculous conception and birth of our Savior? Every effort to inculcate these great truths but tends to bestialize his nature, and by obfuscating his little brain, unfits him for the duties assigned him as a ewer of wood and a carrier of water. The effort makes him a demon of wild, fanatical destruction, and consigns him to the fatal shot of the white man.
And so he was consigned. The North, as well as the South, grew tired of the eternal nigger.
We must render this a white man's government, or convert the land into a Negro man's cemetery.
By 1874, it seemed that both these dreams would come true. hundreds of Negroes who started out for the voting booth wound up in the cemetery. By 1877, it was a white man's government again. President Hayes appointed Frederick Douglass Marshal of the District of Columbia, and he wrote,
I have no protection at home, no resting place abroad. I'm an outcast from the society of my childhood and an outlaw in the land of my birth. I am a stranger with thee, a sojourner as all my fathers were.
Why, step aside there, boy. Look out there now. You can't go in there. You ain't looking for trouble, are you, son? Smile. Say yes, sir. And sing, boy. Sing and dance. Dance Frederick Douglass, 72 years old. Consul General to the Republic of Haiti. Dance Booker T. Washington, 33 years old. Founder of Tuskegee Institute and advisor to presidents. Dance, boy. Dance. Dance. By the end of the 19th century, Jim Crow was a part of the marrow of America. Negro and whites could no longer eat together, could no longer sleep together.
Whenever the Constitution comes between me and the white women and the virtue of the white women of the South, I say to hell with the Constitution.
So freedom was denied both Negroes and whites. White nurses were forbidden to treat Negro males. White teachers couldn't teach Negro students. South Carolina forbade white and black workers to look out of the same window. Florida required Negro and white textbooks to be segregated in warehouses. New Orleans segregated white and black prostitutes. Atlanta provided Jim Crow Bibles for white and black witnesses. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a descendant of aristocrats, a graduate of Fisk and Harvard University, in 1904 organized the Niagara Movement, which was later absorbed into the NAACP. He described the adventures of a Negro in the 20th century.
It was 1 o'clock, and I was hungry. I walked into a restaurant, seated myself, and reached for the bill of fare.
Sir, do you wish to force yourself upon those who do not want you?
No, I wish to eat.
Are you aware, sir, that this is social equality?
It's nothing of the sort. It is hunger. And I ate. The day's work being done, I sought the theater. I beg pardon.
You enjoy being where you're not wanted?
Oh, no.
Well, you're not wanted here.
I fear you're mistaken. I certainly want the music, and I should like to think that the music wants me to listen to it.
This is social equality.
Oh, no. It's the second movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. After the theater, I sought the hotel where I had sent my luggage.
What do you want?
Rest.
This is a white hotel.
Such a color scheme demands a great deal of cleaning, but I'm sure I don't object.
We object. We don't keep niggers. We don't want social equality.
Neither do I. I want a bed. I left. Walking, I met a traveler who crossed to the other side of the road where it was muddy. I asked his reasons.
Niggers is dirty.
So is mud. Moreover, I'm not as dirty as you. That is, not yet.
But you're a nigger, ain't you?
My grandfather was so called.
Well, then.
Do you live in the South?
Yeah. Starve there.
Well, it seems to me that you and the Negroes might get together and vote out starvation.
We don't let them vote. Niggers is too ignorant to vote.
But I am less ignorant than you.
But you're a nigger.
Well, I certainly am what you mean by that.
Yeah. Well, then. Moreover, I don't want my sister to marry a nigger.
Well, if a Negro should ask her, suppose she would just say no.
Listen, she ain't gonna marry you even if she says yes.
But I don't want to marry her.
Why not?
Because I'm already married, and I rather like my wife.
But she's a nigger.
Well, her grandmother was called that.
Well, then.
In 1895, Booker T. Washington went to Atlanta as the guest of honor at the Cotton States Exposition. He was 39 president of Tuskegee Institute.
This was the first time in the entire history of the Negro that a member of my race had been asked to speak from the same platform with white Southern men and women on any important national occasion. I was equally determined to be true to the North as well as to the best element of the white South in what I had to say. Mr. President, gentlemen of the Board of Directors and citizens, the Negro's greatest danger is that in the great leap from slavery to freedom, we may overlook the fact that the masses of us are to live by the production of our hands. No race can prosper until it learned that there is as much dignity in tilling the field as in writing a poem. It is at the bottom of life we must begin, and not at the top.
Easily, the most striking thing in the history of the American Negro since 1876 is the ascendancy of Mr. Booker T. Washington. One hesitates, therefore, to criticize a life which, beginning with so little, has done so much. And yet, the time is come when one may speak in all sincerity and with utter courtesy of the mistakes and shortcomings of Mr. Washington's career. Whereas Frederick Douglass, in his old age, still bravely stood by the ideals of early manhood, ultimate assimilation through self-assertion and on no other terms, Booker T. Washington arose as essentially the leader of not one race, but of two, a compromiser between the North, the South, and the Negro. Mr. Washington represents, in Negro thought, the old attitudes of adjustment and submission.
And to the white race, were I permitted, I would repeat what I say to my own people. Cast your bucket down among the 8 millions of Negroes whose habits you know, whose fidelity and love you have tested in days when to have proved treacherous meant the ruin of your fireside. And while doing this, you can be sure in the future, as you have been in the past, that you and your families will be surrounded by the most patient, faithful, law-abiding, and unresentful people the world has seen, as we have proven our loyalty to you in the past in nursing your children, waiting by the sick beds of your mothers and fathers, and often following them with tear-dimmed eyes to their grave. So in the future, in our humble way, we will stand by you with a devotion no foreigner can approach. And in all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in things essential to our mutual progress.
And Mr. Washington's program practically accepts the alleged inferiority of the Negro race. We do not expect that the free right to vote, to enjoy civic rights, and to be educated should come at once. Nor do we expect to see the bias and prejudices of years disappear at the blast of a trumpet. But we are absolutely certain that the way of a people, rather the way for a people to gain respect, is not by continually belittling and ridiculing themselves. On the other hand, on the contrary, the Negro must insist continually, in season and out of season, that voting is essential to modern manhood, that color discrimination is barbarism, and that black boys need education as well as white boys.
30 days in jail with my back turned to the wall, turned to the wall. 30 days in jail.
1919. Bessie Smith was singing the blues. Her blues, it was said, could be funny and boisterous, and gentle and angry and bleak. But underneath them all ran the raw bitterness of being a human being who had to think twice about which toilet she could use. You cannot hear Bessie without hearing why Martin Luther King doesn't want to wait anymore.
Actively, we have woven ourselves with the very warp and woof of this nation. We fought their battles, shared their sorrow, mingled our blood with theirs. And generation after generation, we have pleaded with a headstrong, careless people to despise not justice, mercy, and truth, lest the nation be smitten with a curse. Our song, our toil, our cheer, and our warning have been given to this nation in blood brotherhood. Are not these gifts worth the giving? Is not this work, this striving? Would America have been America without her Negro people?
The next year, Marcus Garvey addressed 25,000 of his followers in Madison Square Garden in New York. His message to the Negro people was a simple one: back to Africa.
While others are raising the cry of white America, of white Canada, of white Australia, we, without reservations, raise the cry of a black Africa. Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, his men of big affairs? And where is his army, his navy, and his ambassadors? When Europe was inhabited by a race of savages, naked men, heathens and pagans, Africa was peopled by a race of cultured black men who were masters in arts, science, and literature. Men who were cultured and refined. Men who, it is said, were like the gods. Why then should we lose hope? Black men were once great. You shall be great again.
In 1923, at the height of his power, the height of his career, Marcus Garvey claimed 4 million followers. America had seen nothing like this. Everywhere there was the blossoming pride in being black. Negro girls had white dolls snatched from their arms and replaced with black dolls. Little Negro boys studied the history of black heroes. Marcus Garvey even had secret meetings with the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan. And when this was discovered, he made no apologies.
Lynchings and race riots all work to our advantage. By teaching the Negro he must build a civilization of his own or forever remain the white man's victim. The Ku Klux Klan is going to make this a white man's country. They are perfectly honest and frank about it. Fighting them will get you nowhere. I regard the Klan, the Anglo-Saxon clubs, the white American societies as better friends of the race than all other groups of hypocritical whites put together. I like honest and fair play. You may call me a Klansman if you will, but every white man is a Klansman, and there's no use lying about it.
Marcus Garvey is without doubt the most dangerous enemy of the Negro people. He is either a lunatic or a traitor. He is yelling to life from the black side, a race consciousness which, if it blazes into a real flame, means eternal war and bloodshed.
The black and white races are now facing the crucial time of their existence. The whites are rightfully and properly crying out for a pure white race, and the proud and self-respecting blacks are crying out for a moral and pure and healthy Negro race. Between both, we have a new school of thought, advanced by the near-white or colored man, Dr. W.E.B. DuBois, who advocates racial amalgamation or general miscegenation with the hope of creating a new colored race by wiping out both black and white.
1925, Garvey's bubble burst. His Back to Africa movement collapsed. Marcus Garvey was the product of an extraordinary era, the fabulous 20s. During those years, Negro artists poured out a stream of plays and poems and musical compositions. That era has gone down in history as the Negro Renaissance. It was a period, wrote Langston Hughes, when local and visiting royalty were not at all uncommon in Harlem. It was a period when every year there was at least one hit play on Broadway with the Negro cast. It was a period, God help us, when Ethel Barrymore appeared in blackface as Scarlett's Sister Mary. It was the period when the Negro was in vogue. And then the stock market collapsed. During the Great Depression, Negro America and the woods of Lester Granger almost fell apart. There's a bitter bit of poetry. Negroes, last hired, first fired. Then came the war, and Negroes marched off again to fight for democracy, and came home again for whites only. At the end of the era, in 1945, some changes had been made, but mostly it was the same old story. The first Fair Employment Practices Act was passed in New York. But in Gary, Indiana, 1,000 white students walked out of 3 schools protesting school integration.
And when you wake up each morning, aren't you glad that you were born? Think what you got the whole day through. Aren't you glad you're you?
A hit song of the time, Aren't You Glad You're You? And when you wake up each morning, aren't you glad that you were born? Think what you've got the whole day through. Aren't you glad you're you?
When a meadowlark appears, aren't you glad you've got 2 ears? And if your heart is singing too, aren't you glad you're you? You can see a summer sky, or touch a friendly hand, or taste an apple pie. Pardon my grammar, but ain't life grand? And when you wake up each morning, aren't you glad that you were born? Think what you got the whole day through. Aren't you glad you're you? And when you wake up each morning, aren't you glad that you were born?
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.